Hello again to our last session for today, and I do have again Oliver with me. Hello, Oliver.
Yay! Hi, Ebra. Nice to see you again.
The topic of our this session is well-structured media archives and different use cases to that. So, could you explain me first of all what is a media archive?
Well, a media archive is basically a place where you store your media content. That's straightforward. The question is, what is media content? Media content is, let's take the example of a video, is your source file, so the original that came out of the camera. It may be the editorial versions of the same film, so you may have different edits, for a short version, a long form, etc. You may have different language versions. You may have versions with subtitles, with branding, and then you get into all the technical variations. So you have the source file, but then maybe you have two or three what we call derivatives, other qualities, which you might need for web playout, or if you're doing broadcast, or you're sending it off to Netflix, etc., etc. So that's what the media part of a media archive is. And then, and people don't think of this, you come to all the metadata. And what is metadata? Well, it's the title, it's the description, but it is also what rights do you have to this item? Who are the actors? When was this uploaded? When was it approved? So all of the processing information that you generate when you produce something, or even just you've been uploaded by your supplier and you are the broadcaster, you'll have lots of rights information. When am I broadcasting this? Did I publish this onto the VOD platform 123, and when did I do so? How much revenue did I get from that publication? There's endless amount of metadata being created during production, during ownership, and of course during monetization. And all of that belongs into your media archive because it's part of the piece of media that you're talking about. So it's actually a much bigger thing than people realize. That's why we at Flowworks, we call them media containers actually, or as I always say, shoeboxes. So people get a picture in their head that, it's not just a video. There's lots of stuff attached to that. And a media archive manages all of that.
Yeah, so we discussed today different use cases in the different kind of organizations, like a post-production environment, like a production environment, or governmental, or public archives, things like that. Could you give us a definition of the characteristic or the features which differs that kind of organizations?
Well, you can probably differentiate. There's not that much of a difference. Obviously, things like the technical qualities might be different. The metadata for sure will be different. The user rights, etc. The project management will all differ. But at the end of the day, everybody is making sure that they have all their media in one space and they have all the metadata knowledge around that media in one space. What really differentiates those customer groups that you mentioned, if you are a post-production, you typically don't own the content yourself. It kind of goes through your organization. And so you're very much focused on project management, which of course has metadata as well. What's the project called? Who's participating? What jobs do I need to do? What deadlines do I have? Which is a very important part of a media system, is to obviously have project management. And the media sits inside that project, again, coupled with user rights. If you are, just to take a different extreme, if you are a government institution, a public library, if you are a university, typically you may not be the owner of the rights, but you are the keeper of the rights. You have kind of a slightly historian approach to the media content. You want to make sure it's all there. It's perfectly, but really perfectly described with the metadata. They really go for detailed descriptions of what you see in the time codes. They are very, very picky, and they need to be very picky on the rights. So what rights does somebody own to this piece? Where can I publish it to? Where was it published, and to what effect? And of course, if you're an industrial company, you have a lot of content produced for you, and yes, you own it and you keep it for your staff especially, but your focus will actually be publishing, because you're producing the content in order to show the wonderful washing machine, cars, nuclear power plants that you actually make. So your media conveys the message, and so it's all about publishing. But again, in describing these differences, all of those companies do something quite similar, but their focus is a little bit different. People will focus more on the project of producing something versus saying I'm the keeper of this material. It's the long-term approach versus, okay, I keep my material, but I'm all about publishing, like an industrial would be.
So when we have a closer look to the people or customers you work today, what is the most? So for which kind of group do you build the most archive systems?
Well, it's actually a difficult question to answer, because you have a lot of small production houses who have archives, but you're probably also saying, what are kind of really big ones? And yes, the really big archives in the strict sense are more for the industrials. And what really signifies that as well is that not just will they have huge amounts of media. Don't just think video, but they will also have lots of photo. They'll have endless amounts of documents, going from a sales brochure all the way to, PDF giving you the contract details of that advertising spot you made. All of that does sit in your media archive. But one of their key focuses is user rights and management of access to the content. Why? Because classically, industrial, if you think of SAP, if you think of Porsche, if you think of Volkswagen, you can just imagine how many users want to use that media, and they're going to be spread globally. There's no way you're going to be able to train these people. You're not even going to try training. There's just too many of them. We're talking about tens of thousands of users. So you, for sure, first of all, want to manage the access to both the content. So only approved content gets seen by Joe Blow in Hong Kong, but also access to the functions. I mean, a media asset management system or a digital archive now is obviously much more than just an archive. It's a workflow engine, it's an ingester, it's a processing unit, it's a publisher, etc., etc. So you need to be careful of who gets to see what and what are they allowed to do with it. That may not be so important for a post-production house where the teams are much smaller and tighter, but nevertheless, even a post-production house needs to think about these things because they constantly share content with their customers. And for sure, you don't want your customer to see everything you've done because you'll see all the rubbish as well. And you definitely don't want to give your customer all the buttons. So the flexibility in a system like, we talked about a well-structured system, that needs to and absolutely needs to include the ability to really flexibly and in a very detailed manner manage access to content and access to function.
Let's focus a moment to broadcast companies. What do they differ from industrials? Are they more professional? Do they better know how to operate a system or how to manage metadata, or is it at the end the same?
Well, that's actually an interesting question. To tell you the nasty bit first, no, in my experience, broadcasters, they have a lot more knowledge about media and technology, but actually they don't care either. Keep in mind that a media archive, 98% of your users will be regular editorial users. They're not techies. They don't care about transcoding. They don't understand transcoding. They don't know what a JSON is. You've told them what an XML is and they've forgotten 5 times. So editorial users anywhere only care about the content and they expect all of the function to simply happen under the hood. It's got to be automated. So the difference between a broadcaster who has by tendency more of a throughput, feature films come in, we need to produce a trailer, we need to produce photos, we need to produce lots of metadata, and then we go off and publish that, let's say to our press service, we put it on our listing sites, we put it on the website, we finally also monetize it via a VOD platform, etc. A broadcaster by nature doesn't really produce to own, and they rarely really own that much. They tend to kind of process it through, and it comes out the other end. The eyes meet it and people see it. That's where they make their money, and it's goodbye. And an industrial really will hang on to absolutely everything because it is the company heritage and the company history. But for both users, and this is actually pretty much true for everybody except maybe post-production houses, they don't want to see the technology. They expect the system to be mega powerful, be able to do virtually anything, but without them having to actually press any buttons to make that happen. So workflow, the ability to have workflows in the system and be able to automate as much as you can is not just important to the users, but it's important to the business case. The more automation you have, the less error, the faster it'll go.
So you mentioned that post-production companies are a little bit different. What makes them different?
Well, one of the prime differences that I can think of is obviously they ingest a lot. So ingest is an important part of the overall process, and for the stuff they're ingesting, it's hugely important for them to have a gatekeeper to make sure they know what's coming in, if it's coming in the right quality, if the metadata is there. Have I notified the guys from the project where this piece of media is going? Have I made sure that those guys know they need to review those items and either approve or comment or disapprove? So the whole check-in process is hugely important with the post-production house, because only with a decent check-in will you have proper project assignment, will you have proper assignment, for example, to the editing work that you're going to do, or that you need to produce that French soundtrack, the dubbing, by next Wednesday. So the check-in is hugely important with the post-production house. That's not very important for an industrial, and it probably isn't that important for a broadcaster. And the second thing that I can think of for a post-production house, or a production house as well, they quickly need to share content with their customers. Typically, that's somebody who said, look, please post-produce this for me. So they have a high frequency and a very important review and approval process with the people who finally say okay, which is regularly customer. And that is crucial because it's business crucial. If they don't get an approval, they're not going to get paid.
Yeah, so let's focus on another area of customer group now, governmental institutions. I assume that there are so many different strict rules how you can work with them and how they can interact with their different parties. So what is important for that kind of customer group?
Well, I would say the important thing is they will maybe not be as proficient in describing their media workflows as, for example, a producer or a broadcaster would be. So they are quite open, and they also need a bit of help, showing them best practices, understanding what they're trying to achieve, and then giving them a good idea of how to best do that. Obviously, showing them examples helps. So if we're talking to university, for example, if we're talking to a national library, if we're currently having a discussion with the European Army, one of the nations, I'm not going to tell you which. Those guys have a lot of media, and they might even be the heritage keepers of their nation or their state, and that's very important media to them. But they ingest from a lot of different sources. Stuff comes in totally wacky and wild formats. Some of it is really ancient. So they have a lot of issues which are technical, but they are not very proficient in answering that technically, because they don't have the in-house expertise. And that's really where people like us and our partners come in to really, help them, and not just in designing the processes, but actually getting the system to work and set up to catch out all the problems that they might have. State institutions are fascinating, I find, because their content is pretty much endless if you do it right. They will keep acquiring additional content from other institutions. They're very friendly people. They bring a little bit more time than the average post-production house, so it's a bit more relaxed, but they're not less demanding, believe me.
I do know. As one group of the governmental customers, you mentioned universities, and I do know from experience that they, again, do have a complete different use case and needs for an angle of an archive system. Could you quickly explain what they are seeking for?
Well, a university has, it actually couples a couple of various things. A university will, by nature, have a strong impetus towards archiving their stuff because, they have a library, so that's what they do. Secondly, universities produce an awful lot of media, especially now with COVID, and people have gotten used to that. It's just totally normal to actually video a lecture. It's totally normal to have a guest speaker just on the laptop. And of course, you want to make that available. So publishing is a huge issue. A university will produce an enormous amount of content every single day that needs to go somewhere, and it needs to go somewhere in a structured way, it's a well-chosen title, so they will be able to find it again in 50 years. Which is not trivial. So you need to be on top of your metadata. They usually are, and they really have a lot of the stuff, and it's good. But they need help in actually doing the production, so the quality of the media that comes in is actually good, and it's easy to use. And certainly not last, they do an awful lot of play out. You just saw my son come in. So they do an awful lot of play out, especially now with COVID. People are actually watching lectures online. Most of it is live, others is recorded. So they suddenly need to become expert for VOD. How do I publish? How do I run a portal for VOD content, the lectures of the last 2 months? That's crucial stuff. It's a super duper interesting market. And I'm sure it's not going to go away, even if we manage to beat COVID at some point.
I do know that your system is built from 3 tiers, so technical, editorial, and the front end. How do you technically manage this in the different customer groups, or is it somehow the same?
Well, no, you're right. It is always the same core system. So there is always, in every single installation, there is a core technical tier. That's where your ingest comes in. That's where we do all the quality control. That's where we do all the processing, like transcoding and branding and dubbing and adding logos, etc., etc. And that's, of course, also where we do all the outgest, be it that we forward the file onto a broadcast system, we play it out onto the website. So that all happens in the technical tier, which is also operated by techies. So it's a select few techies who actually see that GUI. Sitting above that is the editorial GUI, and that's where most of the users are. That's where 98% of the users are. They are only concerned with the content and not the technology, as I said. So all of our customers have those two views to the same system. If we have a customer, and increasingly so, almost everybody's starting to get them, that also has playout, single playout, multiple playout, web playout, VOD platform playout, broadcast playout, put it off to social media, put it in a shop, whatever their business might be, we obviously would have that third tier. The point about the system is, because we talked about this, we serve so many different markets, and each company within that each market is different. It's a very big system, but it's entirely flexible. It's got to be very flexible. If we're going to serve so many different customers, we'd go nuts if it wasn't super flexible. But it is also a bit of a Chinese menu approach. So we have a lot of modules. and it really depends on where you are, what you'd like to do. If you're a post-production house, you're probably not that concerned about publication. If you're an industrial who does a lot of publication, you're not really worried about super duper complex ingest and QC processes. You're not going to attach an editing suite because that's what your producers do for you. So we have a modular system, big system consisting of lots of modules. And you can basically, it's a bit like the Lego approach. You can basically combine any module that you think you'd like to use now, and grow the system when you're ready to grow it. So, if you're first going to clean up your archive, clean up your production, and then later, once you've got that, you're going to go into publication, do that, because you can simply add the next module whenever you're ready.
So it's a kind of configuration of the same core system for the different customer groups. How much customizing is then needed?
Well, ideally, we'd always say there shouldn't be any customizing. Please, let's not customize anything because we can configure just about everything. The truth is, it's amazing how creative customers can be, and they do still keep coming up with things that we haven't got in the system yet, or we haven't got in exactly that way. So you can pretty much configure, I would say, at least 80% of the system, which is really a lot. I mean, the thing has thousands of features, and most of them are configurable. But then again, of course, we are happy to customize not just the visualization, that's typical customization, but to customize for very specific other third-party machinery to be integrated, which is pretty rare. We customize for building very specific workflows for and with the customer, so we help them build those themselves. But there you sometimes see detailed features which we need in a specific shape and form. Everything is possible, but we really try and advise people not to go overboard on the customizing because it is work. It does cost money, not just work for us, but also work for you. You can configure an awful lot, and most importantly, it really makes sense to start with the system, get your basic configuration and your basic customization done, but then start using the system, because as you use it, you actually learn exactly how you'd like something to use. It's difficult to do that with a pen and paper exercise. It's better to do it in real life. So do it with a little bit of time and do it gradually.
Yeah, we talked about a lot of the different needs of customers with the media archive today in this session, also in the previous sessions. But if you could give or dream about what is media archive in future, are there different needs in future? Do needs change, or do you think it keeps the same, but the system maybe changed?
No, what I think the core that's there today for a media archive will be the core of the future as well, because it's a place where all of your media, along with all of the knowledge you have, also known as metadata, sits in shoeboxes and is in a controlled, and it's complete, it's structured, and it's in a controlled environment. I think that's going to remain true for the future as well. I think what will change, and potentially change radically, is how do you actually make content accessible? Currently, people are using the content internally in their own company. I'm a post producer, only my editors get to see the content. Maybe in future, editing jobs won't be done company internally, but everything will be running over creative platforms. So you don't want to put your content onto Getty Images because it's yours, but you may want to source the people working on it, not just by walking down the aisle to the next office, but that might be from the web. And I think the same is going to be true for where does new content come from. I think there'll be a market change with really professional content coming from people that you've not met before. That will be relevant to you, that you'll want to ingest. So you need systems that obviously do the core, but have a view to the publication. And because publication means I'm sending out a message to you, but actually publication also means you could be sending a message back to me. Because you're publishing to me. So it's a two-way process. Opening up these systems and keeping them flexible, yet structured and controlled, I think those will be the challenges of the future, and I think it's going to be very exciting.
So should I ask you which is your favorite customer group? No, I shouldn't. I think we talked a lot about all the difference between them, and all of them have their challenges and their strengths, but at the end we like all our customers.
Absolutely. They're all darlings.
Exactly. So Oliver, thank you for today. We keep that a little bit shorter. We spoke about all the different cases. Again, the different groups have been post-production, production, broadcasters, governmental, and the universities. And we are happy to share more information about the different groups in the coffee bar right after. You could join us there to talk about everything you like. And yeah, Oliver will be there. Thank you for today, and talk to you tomorrow again.